Welcome to the Richmond Parking Advisory Committee meeting for Monday, April 28th. And we have welcome and public comment at 6 p.m. Any additions or deletions to the agenda? All right, moving on, approval of the April 7th minutes. We had a chance to read them.
Fine job as always. I would move that we approve the April 7th minutes as presented.
I second that.
Minutes are approved.
Right.
Moving on to the discussion topics. Discussion of Town of Richmond Code of Ethics and Conflicts of Interest Policy with Town Manager Josh Arneson.
Sure. Join
That
us.
was a dry spot.
Come on down.
Yes. Thank you, John, for joining us.
Sure, thanks for inviting me.
I think we realized you're kind of caught in the middle of all this. Which we appreciate you more for that. Right?
Yeah.
You want to read it? You're the one who was, there's no conflict. of
Well,
interest.
you were helpful, Josh, and you submitted a question to the
State Ethics Commission.
Ethics Committee,
Yeah.
and there was a nuance that didn't get covered. That for me, and the others may have different questions. That perhaps if there's a 3-mile road and there's a parking issue on one end, then somebody who lives on the other end, there's maybe they would come to the conclusion, in this case, they didn't have a conflict of interest. And if it's right in front of them, then maybe they would think there was, and if it's somewhere in the middle, perhaps, as I understood it, each member of the committee has to make their own decision.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a judgment call in this one. It's not a direct one, right? Where like there's a contract to go to a company that you own. It's sort of like, is that close enough to my house to be a conflict? That's sort of how I read what I think she was saying. Because yeah, Cochran Road's what, 3 miles long? And something down at the Road Church end may not affect Diane and John as much because they're 3 miles away from that.
Yeah.
But right, where it gets tricky is what if it's at the other end of the 25-mile zone by your house? Quarter-mile away, you know, and so yeah, I think unfortunately some of it is a bit of a judgment call.
I read her comment a little bit narrower than that. I think that's one of the reasons why I didn't want to talk to you.
Okay.
She said, if you're on the road, which I thought was, I don't know if it was just she was writing too quickly or not really thinking, but we all had very similar reactions to that. Is what if you're on the 3-mile road or a 5-mile road or a 6-mile road and you're at the other end or whatever.
I couldn't help but think that if you're on Willison Road or Barry Montpelier Road or major thoroughfare, that logic there is hard to follow. I mean, you and I can walk out in the middle of the road in front of our houses and see 200 yards of Dugway.
Right. It's not like you're on Church Street.
Right.
If you're on Church Street, I could see anywhere on Church Street could be a conflict because it's very small. But like these roads that are 2, 3, 4, 5 miles long, I think it's tougher to say that anywhere on that road affects you.
What's funny is that I thought the key to this initial conversation wasn't so much what creates a conflict of interest. It was her statement that if there's a conflict of interest, you don't vote and you don't add to the dialogue in the meeting. And now we kind of wander down the path of what is the conflict of interest.
And she was clear to letting a person have a First Amendment right to speak.
Right.
So she's very clear on that, like, yes, you can speak in a segment of this meeting perhaps, or, the select board or, so she's clear on that, but it's just like, and then the discussion of who thinks it's a conflict of interest is the other, yeah.
So is it your understanding that, the first decision is the individuals?
Right?
And then would somebody else, like a member of the public or something like that, would someone have to declare it? Or say that they think it's a conflict in order for it to end up coming your way or the way of the select board?
Right, what the complaint process would be?
Well, I'm just wondering about the process of, well, let me give you a specific example, because I think there were various reasons why we all joined the parking committee, but because I'm on Dugway, there's the annual problem with the gorge, but I'm a mile away from the gorge. But nevertheless, I get to see the rescue vehicles and all of that on the way, but I'm a mile away from the gorge. If I vote on something that has to do with parking a mile up the road, I'm assuming that then somebody would have to say, well, no, Matt should not have voted on that in order for it to be an issue, if I've determined.
Right, yeah, if you determine that you don't have a conflict
Right.
and you've proceeded with the meeting, with the discussion, then yeah, somebody could file a complaint and say, oh, Matt has a conflict because he lived a mile away and he should have recused himself. And then that would, yeah, ultimately go to the select board for their consideration and discussion about, okay, do we believe this is a conflict or not? We had a couple of these with the DRB recently. I don't know if you guys followed the select board that closely, but we had a couple filed. That were saying there was a conflict. I think it was, the first one was, what was the first one? I remember. The second one was about a member that they thought had a lot of conversations with an applicant prior to them coming before the DRB and might have been interested in purchasing a lot that was going to be created by the subdivision. And he didn't recuse himself. So that went to the select board and they talked about it. They spent quite a bit of time talking about the policy. I think it was under the old policy at that time, but they spent quite a bit of time talking about it. At the end of that one, I don't think much really happened, but there was another one that it was actually, was it David? But no, I think it was Matt Parisi was on the DRB, but he had an application before the DRB and he didn't recuse himself. He sat in the audience, or no, he sat and delivered his presentation about the subdivision. They went through the whole thing. They were going to deliberative session. And then that was brought, you want to move over and find your place to share. So that was brought to the select board. And in that case, they said, yeah, it seemed like the board always sort of knew he was recused, but they needed to formally state that, but they didn't. So the select board said, well, you have to rehear that now because you didn't follow the proper procedure. So in some cases, there's repercussions like that where you actually have to redo something. In other cases, the other one was really wasn't a decision made. So they said, okay, just do better next time. But I hear that you probably like some better guidance before it comes to that, right? Because you're going to make your best decision on it's a mile away. I shouldn't have to recuse myself. You don't want to be standing in front of the select board with a complaint against you.
Yeah, but I think hearing you talk about it though, I'm relieved. I think we needed the confirmation that it's our judgment call. And then we'll see if somebody questions that judgment.
Yeah. And someone could question you in the meeting. They could come in and say, no, I think you should recuse yourself. And then I guess you could have a conversation and you could say, well, here's why I don't think it's a conflict. Or you could say, you know what, you're right, you got a point. I live very close there. I should recuse. So it could be a conversation there. And then the part in there, as I reread it about writing a letter to the select board, I think that's if you acknowledge there's a conflict. If you say, yeah, it is in front of my house. However, I'm part of the committee without me to have a quorum. And I'm going to do this objectively and declare my, well, actually I take that back, because in the video, there was very specific reasons why you could choose to not recuse. So I think just saying there's a quorum, I think I have to reread that section. And I look at that, the training video was pretty clear on, trying to remember, they gave really good examples, and I just can't recall off the top of my head, where you could say, no, I need to stay in because no one else can do this kind of
That's
thing.
exactly right.
Yeah.
Or if it was like such a small amount, like of money or something that,
De minimis.
De minimis,
Where it
yeah.
comes-
Yeah.
It comes up.
Yeah, we
And-
talked about that last.
yeah, and that's when you would write a letter to the select board and say, like, no one else can do this, or yeah, it was a $50 thing, and I just said, listen, not recuse myself.
I can't think of a scenario where that would apply for us.
I don't think so either, yeah.
I do have a question about applicability, and I know that the state has a standard. And Richmond has decided to apply that standard more broadly, which makes sense. But the state statute was about a decision-making body. And when I think about what PAC has done in the past, it's been an advisory body, so in a way, it's staff. So if someone were to recuse themselves and then still make it known at the select board that they have a certain view, I mean, wouldn't you want as a select board to know that there wasn't a consensus? I mean, in other words, mechanically, you could make it so that, you know, it seemed unanimous because the people who had opposing views were not part of it. But I'm thinking that in the context of completed staff work, you would want to know that there was a difference of opinion, and you, the select board, is the sort of, that's what we answer to,
Mhm,
would be able to go, well, I understand that, you know,
mhm.
neighbor, in this case, say, neighbors versus other
But
interests. But I wonder if it's worth all of this thinking when it's an advisory group, if we have a point of advice and we're not unanimous and we report it as such,
Mhm.
and people would be able to understand an intrinsic bias. It's not a binding decision.
Right, so in that scenario, you're envisioning that the member who would recuse themselves would be like living next to the parking area and have a different opinion than the rest of the body, which is certainly a possibility. I think that, yeah, when it goes to the select board, you could say, okay, it was these 4 members voted, it was unanimous, however, you know, John recused because he lived on the road right in front of it, and he said in a public meeting that he was against this. You know, there's a way to convey that, but I do think you're right too, that the risk of any sort of a complaint coming, because it's the advisory committee, like, you're not the select board making the final say. You're offering advice.
Right,
And
and I
if you,
think that advice would be, I mean, it'd be transparent and be not a public record. The
yes,
select board would be able
Yeah.
to say, I mean, I think it would, in a situation like that where there are conflicting and valid reasons both ways, you know,
Mhm.
that's where the public and the select board need to sort of weigh. I just.
Yeah. And I think that's where it's like, in a case like, I'll just use like you and Diane who live across the street from like the Bummer or Meadow. If you, like, that might be a direct, like pretty clear, like you're right there.
Yeah.
It's gonna affect your peace and well-being and your property values, so you should be recused. You know, but in Matt's case, where he's a mile down the road, that gets a little bit more of a judgment call, but that's where I think the negative repercussions on that, if Matt says, no, I can be fair about this, it's not a conflict because I live a mile away. Well, if somebody ever called him out on that, you know, when you go to the select board with your advice, you'd say, well, the committee was unanimous and Matt said this. I don't know what they're gonna do, throw out the advice and, you know.
Kick me off the
like,
board.
They could kick you off the board, but I think that there's, you know, so that's where there's sort of some gray area, but the risk of punishment isn't that great, and especially if you're in a bit of a gray area like
I'm
that.
more
So I
worried
hate to
that-
be a little squishy, but I feel like this is a
No,
weird one.
I'm thinking about it, you know, down the road where you want people who
No,
have, everyone who's joined this group has had a horse in the game.
Sure,
One way or the other, and you want passionate people who try to look at things objectively. And I'm just wondering, you know, if we make it so hard to thread that needle, will you have representation of the way that people, so it depends. I mean, I think as a staff function, it would be our responsibility to say there's disagreement and people would understand the nature of the disagreement. I mean, you're right across the board, you have one feeling and you're down the road.
yeah.
But anyway,
Yeah, but I still think that, like, I mean, the letter from Christina is clear that, you know, she says on the road, but I do think if you're directly across the street or it's like right in front of your house, you're probably best to recuse. But if you're a mile away, it might be a little bit more of a judgment call. And then maybe that, as she states here, there's ways to still participate in the discussion. And that could go to the select board with that advice that, this person recused, the rest of the committee thought this.
And
I
I,
read that differently. I read that
Me too.
I haven't had it for a while. I read that if you recuse yourself from the vote, you set aside that you're part of the committee, you go to the public, you make a public statement. So when we report to the select board, you no longer
Right, that's a good point.
represent yourself
Yeah.
as a member of the committee who didn't agree with the group.
That's a good point. You could say public comment was,
You can be a public
Yeah.
comment, but you're not part of the committee.
that's a good point. Yeah, you could say there was some public comment for and against this and discuss that. And then, of course, that member would also have the right at the select board meeting to say, I'm a member, I recuse myself, but here's why I'm for or against.
Right, it's different than 4 yeses and 1
Yeah,
no.
no, yeah, you're right. You're very right. That's a good distinction. Yes.
And protecting the First Amendment, right, which is really important. But I also read that if you're gonna recuse, you have to leave it, really.
Well, I think you leave,
Public area.
you leave it, yeah, you can leave and come back, or you at least have to say, I'm recusing, and then go to the public area. And then when you're speaking, make sure that you're speaking as a member of the public, not as a member of the board.
I took it to mean that if I were to recuse if I had a conflict of interest tonight for an agenda item, I would announce I had a conflict of interest. I'm assuming, and I guess we can see if this makes sense, I'd go sit in that chair over there and announce that I was a member of the public.
Mhm.
And then I could be called on and asked to be called on, speak my piece. And then when we moved on to agenda item that's not a conflict of interest, I would come back to the other part of the room. Right? Is that?
Yeah, and when there's
And
a,
I think you would sit and say, Chuck Gilroy, resident Dugway Road. And I would speak my piece as opposed to Chuck Gilroy, I usually sit over there, but then, I would make it clear, like you said this in the video or whatever, make it clear that you're speaking as a member of the public, so you're right.
And then select board meetings, there's usually an opportunity for members of the public to address the agenda.
yeah. After all, so you'd have two chances to offer public feedback in this committee, and then again at the select board if you wanted to.
Maybe
Yeah.
you need a sign, recusal chair.
I just need to speak it, I'm assuming that, this won't affect our previous work.
I mean, I don't, at this point, I don't
So
see how it
because
really
it's like
could.
new and we're.
Yeah,
We're all on board and we're all signed it and.
I think so. I think it'd be hard for somebody to come back on something you guys recommended 2 years ago that the board took action on and say, oh, we have to go back on that. I suppose they could, and the board could consider it and say, well, did we like what we did or not with that ordinance? But I think your committee is amongst many that are trying to wrap their heads around exactly what does the ethics policy mean and what's new there that we should be looking out for. And I don't know that the earlier committee, I guess the earlier policy didn't really address living on the road. I mean, I never thought of it in that lens. Maybe you could have interpreted it that way, but it's interesting that this, does sort of open it wider.
Like I said, until we heard from this young lady, until we heard back from her,
Yeah.
our biggest concern was not being able to have input in the conversation
Hmm.
and not voting. We're up to this point. We strictly said we don't vote, but we take an active part in the debate. So now we understand that the scope of conflict of interest hasn't changed.
Hmm.
That's always been the same, but now what's changed is we don't only know vote, but we don't contribute to the conversation. That's the part.
You can contribute, but as a member of the public.
Thank you, yes,
Yeah.
exactly right.
And as a matter of record, the recordings and the transcripts and stuff, it would be obvious why you did it. But
Yeah.
it would be appropriate.
Yeah, and that's part of it, with recusal is I'm recusing because I live across the street from the park area.
But your input would be logged as part of public comment.
Yeah, as, John, member of the public.
Right.
To just take the obvious, Josh, one of the reasons we were all concerned is you got 2 Dugway Road residents
Right.
and 2 Cochran Road residents. And I think we all agree that it made no sense for a vote on an important issue to be made by 3. That sort of thing.
And I think, I think you read my notes actually, but so I had came to the same conclusion you did, and we have three choices, we disband, we grow. Or
Merge.
we merge with somebody else, and if we grow. Then part of the interview question has to be, where do you live?
Right,
Where do you work?
can't have another Cochran Road
We
resident,
don't need another Dugway person on
Yeah.
the thing, it just gets sticky.
yeah. And I do, to go back to, I think your earlier point, like, one of the things that reformed this committee was, there's a problem in my neighborhood and I wanna fix it, and the board said, great. Help us fix it, and now we're looking at it going, oh, maybe you can't help us fix this. Which is
Yeah.
a little frustrating, because it's great that people jump in when it affects them. Whether it's parking or for the July committee or whatever else, they jump in because they want to be part of it.
It also, it's so helpful for the select board, who is so much work. To say, hey, can you just go give
Yeah,
me the details on that? You know, as you were saying, John, staff work, or, you know, form a small committee, figure out what's going on with the traffic on such and such a road and report back.
Mhm.
Yeah, I value that for them. This is like, and there's,
yeah,
to gather all that input and then present it forward. Is
yeah.
helpful.
And I agree, but I also do see what, now that it's brought up, like. You know, if the committee was 5 members of Cochran Road, all near Bunbury or Meadow, and you all say, forget it, get them out of here. But you know, there's 90% of the people in town who say, no, I parked there, I wanna go down there and go swimming, and like, you know, it could, like, there could be bias coming in from that perspective.
Sure. I mean, I think in terms of thinking about purely as staff work. That's what we did. If I think about particularly like how we handled Dugway, is that we actually convened neighbors and we told them, and
Yeah,
we came back and we presented what we had heard. Now, they were mostly of one mind, which you would expect, but I think we should continue. So even if we recuse the members, I think that just, you know, whatever advice comes back should report on other, you know, the interested parties, what do the neighbors think, what do members of the public who want to use the space, because otherwise, I mean, we're not a governing body, we're a staff work body. So I think as long as we continue to, if we, of those three options, I think maybe it makes sense to go through each of those three options, but if we continue to work like this, I think the board should, we should report back on any differences of opinion, because there's always going to be them, and then the select board has the data.
mhm.
And as I listened to these three options, I guess the fourth option, which maybe no one else wants, but if tonight we thought some of those signs, have an opinion on the signs that are near the Jonesville Bridge on Cochran Road, three of us could decide and the other two could weigh in, and I'm not immediately throwing out that option.
Mhm.
Or on Dugway Road, if the three of us had some opinion and the other two offered their opinion as citizens, we could move forward. So I'm not completely ready to abandon all work on Cochran and Dugway Road, but others may disagree.
Sure. Anything specific on this topic we need to get from Josh? Or the legal brief?
I always go back to why it was formed and how it was formed. That's been my gold standard. I probably read it more than most people read. And the committee will engage in stakeholders, residents, and town staff to develop solutions for crowded parking areas with a focus on safety of residents, pedestrians, vehicle operators. These suggested solutions will be presented to the select board for consideration, approval, and implementation. I mean, that's a really broad and a nice thing. I think we can, at least for this season, because it's April, I tend to feel like, why don't we hobble along and try this out with this 5 people and recuse and see how it works. Before we say, oh, this isn't gonna work, I don't want to do this anymore. I'm not quite there, you know, like, I think we all actually leave leave our community in the same year, which I think is one more at the end of this year or something, so. I think I'd be interested in trying to work this and keeping this ethics
I think it's important. I don't really want to join another group. Because our goal and our focus is very specific. You know, we want to create safe parking, we want to eliminate unsafe parking. And if we were to become part of the Trails Committee or some other committee, I think that our priorities would change, and I don't think that works well.
Yeah.
I think sometimes there's not a lot going on for us, but having us ready to come in and look at whatever pops up that becomes the next crisis. I think that's important rather than just look at a blank page and say, boy, we used to have a parking committee, you know, and the select board. I think John said it well, and the select board doesn't have time to deal with this stuff. They want it boiled down, they want us to bring them the syrup and say, you know, here it is, you don't have to wade through all the stuff, this is what we figured out.
Yeah, and I think we were also, Chuck, we talked about not being just bureaucratic to be bureaucratic, like me, you know, let us know when we've done enough or we're not needed anymore, but you gave us some great advice over the winter, it's like, just don't meet so much. It was like, oh yeah, we can do that. So we met once a month, right? And that was like, yeah, there's not much to be said, so why are we meeting?
Right.
Because we're so seasonal.
And there's a value in having a long-term view. If you take East Cochran in particular, you know, we've been able to try things, see how they worked, see how they didn't work, change it. And so having that longer term continuity probably helps the select board keep an eye on what we've tried and it hasn't worked, has worked. So I think of your 3, maybe 4 options, I wasn't quite sure where I would put that. So are we
The
all
first one
saying?
is keep going.
So we're kind of saying. Don't disband, I'm just distilling, no one's saying, yeah, we should disband, I think. Chuck, you're making the point, I think a good one, that. Squishing it together might lose the purpose, so are we down to 1 or 2 options? Which is, I mean, one is keep going, and what you just said, which is to see how it works with this recusal thing. What was the other option?
Grow the committee by 2 more members.
Well, the only thing I would say about that,
Can I just interrupt for 1 second? You had a ball game you wanted to go to.
Totally.
This conversation could be had
That's what I'm thinking.
without Josh. I just want to be fair to Josh.
my last point is, we may not want to grow it to get us out of this bureaucratic thing, but as Diane pointed out, all of our terms are going to be up soon for continuity. We may want to organically grow it anyway. As a continuity thing when some of us roll off. So that's.
So agreeing with Matt, I personally think that we've gotten everything from Josh that we needed to get. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
Sure.
Appreciate that. And our future is kind of in our hands and we can move on the agenda without slowing you down.
Sure thing. Well, if you need me in the future, let me know, and of course, reach out, and if I don't have the answer, I'll try to help you get it.
I really appreciate this, and if you get any other insights, how other committees are doing it, like the trails, that was one we were talking about, how other places that might be a conflict.
I'm kind of happy to hear that other people are struggling with this, because I thought this was unique to us. And I couldn't understand how that would be.
No, I think other committees are looking at it, the ones that are being serious about it anyway, are trying to understand what's going on, and I know. Like our PRB staff member, zoning administrators looked at it, had a lot of questions about, well, how do we deal with this, or how do we deal with that, so. No, I appreciate that you're taking the time, and I'm thankful, honestly, that we have somebody at the state that we can reach out to and ask those questions, because. It's essentially their policy, so it's helpful to get some guidance. We never really had that before, other than maybe some people at VLCT, so it's great to have someone who's focused on that.
All right, I'm gonna see if I can just give John a heads up about the next agenda item, and I know you have to leave.
Sure.
Now, we can talk to Pete about this if we want to do
Are
anything.
these?
But those
signs?
are the 2 signs, and then if you need to go. you
Okay,
can-
no, I can, so these are the ones you're trying to move,
Well,
considering?
I'm interested, it's not clear that the committee's interested.
Well, the begin no parking sign, I think, is by the ordinance, right?
Yeah, so
do we check for her? Do we?
Oh, here, take a look at it.
Open up for,
no. It's just a map that we presented to the select board when we put the ordinance in place.
The begin no parking, I thought should, if it followed the ordinance, would start 25 feet from the Duxbury Road.
Okay,
And instead it's about 100 feet, which makes sense if there's an active curb cut for the former entry to the Bombardier Meadow, but now that that's closed, one option would be to say the sign should be 25 feet from the corner.
is that what the ordinance says?
The ordinance says the corner,
Okay.
but there's a separate ordinance that says, and you know.
So when the map was very full, when we presented the select board with this, we had no parking from Duxbury Road all the way around to the bridge. And
Right,
actually showed parking between the guardrail and the telephone pole across the parking area. And the trade-off on that.
Can I see that?
Am I in the right place?
You're on the drive, and those are, you wanna go to the work. But
Oh,
they,
there it is.
the trade-off for blocking all the parking from Dugway, from the Duxbury Road all the way to the Huntington River was that we were gonna allow roughly 18 parking spaces between the Winooski River Bridge and the Duxbury Road on one side of the road. And that was kind of what we offered, and we all agreed to when we presented the select board. I
okay,
can't. So I feel that this is what we put forward to the public. And the select board, this is what the select board approved.
Mhm.
And then to go back in there and stick signs in there and block the parking, I think we lose some credibility.
So Chuck, just for fresh memory, what did the select board approve?
So I'm acknowledging a conflict of interest, but I have information on this. The reason
Should you
why-
be sitting here,
The reason why Pete put that there was because it was an active driveway.
the driveway just behind it,
So the reason why Pete put that there is this was an active
Oh.
driveway for
it was,
the meadow.
that, right,
And it was to make sure nobody parked there so people would enter and use the meadow.
oh, so you're saying that this should be
So with John,
further down the road?
on the other side of this,
Oh, so
of-
there
of the
could-
access
So there
point.
could still be parking in this area,
and
okay,
yes. and-
Yeah.
And people do park in that area, but
but now this is closed off, there's no fear of somebody parking right there,
correct.
Gotcha.
So Pete put that for I think they call it the apron.
okay,
Because when people were actively using that, when he put that there, that was the apron and nobody should park. We were having a lot of people parking in the intersection area.
okay,
So what John is pointing out is, and Chuck are pointing out, legal by ordinance, it should be over
the
here
other side.
on the other
And
side.
the signs, I
Diane, should
think,
you be doing this?
Yeah.
Because I don't think you should.
Okay, okay.
No, we just had a long discussion about this.
Okay, I didn't hear the history of that, and that's why I'm adding that in. So there's nothing, I'm not approving or disapproving, I'm giving history of why Pete put that there.
actually, I think.
Because it
what
wasn't
he-
spoken.
Which is exactly what you shouldn't be doing. Giving input as a
History,
committee member
okay.
to our guests.
Okay.
As a member of the public.
So forget that I said what Pete told who was doing there.
But I think if you recuse yourself,
I don't have,
so,
I'm in agreement that needs to be moved. So I can recuse,
So I think
I'm happy with the
you
movement of
restate.
that. I'm happy with the movement of that. And I'm happy with it staying there. I don't have an opinion of whether, I do have an opinion because I understand the ordinance and that it's not being used as an access point.
the field parking stuff, yeah.
Yes, I'm in agreement.
So I think the easy thing to do is look at the ordinance, figure out where the sign should be, talk to Pete and say, can we move this now, especially if conditions have changed.
I think, yeah, I think to Chuck's point, we should go forward with in the moment when we're talking. At this, I think to.
That
So are you gonna follow up with this? Because obviously there's a couple of problems here. One is that we have a recreational sign that blocks parking that could easily be anywhere in that road. There should be moved to the no parking area. The no parking begins here sign, I believe is premature.
I see what you're saying, okay.
And that should be moved as well.
So this should get out of the way because nobody can park there.
It's blocking.
And it could be further on, closer to the no parking sign, okay?
And the no parking begins here, should go the other side of where the land trust parking lot used to be.
Gotcha. Because that's where the ordinance says it should be.
That's what the ordinance states.
The corner of Duxbury Road and Cochran Road, but if you combine it with the 25-foot rule. I think it's 50 people. Where yeah.
So to check, okay, correct, just from a procedural thing, so even if we agree with something, we should, is that correct?
I believe,
I think so.
once the conversation started, yes.
Okay.
I agree, I just didn't hear history,
I agree.
in that, so it's adding history.
Yeah.
What's that?
I apologize, the person taking the minutes has lost the thread because we're jumping around. Where are we headed on this?
So.
Maybe that would be the easiest way to get back.
There are two signs and the question is, should the begin no parking sign be where it's defined by the ordinance?
Great. I got that.
Now that the access to the meadow is closed.
And the other issue is the recreational.
The
The recreation
recreation.
sign blocks the parking.
It's not great parking, but it is parking.
Okay. So are we advising something? But what's our,
I think we're asking Josh to take up this up with Pete.
Yeah, I'll take it to Pete. I mean,
That's
the
fair.
ordinances need to be changed. I don't think I need to go to the select board. The no parking sign should be able to easily be moved. And the other sign too, unless there's a reason why Pete needs it in that spot. I don't see why it couldn't be moved as well. But I'll ask him what he thinks. So, yeah,
As part of the record keeping, I'm recusing myself. So I think that's,
I'm refusing,
yeah, so we're.
I'm not
recusing
voting
ourselves.
myself.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jack.
You wanna just take that?
sure.
You're welcome to it.
I didn't know if somebody needed it, so I didn't want to take it away from anybody.
Color in there.
They're fine.
It's a $4 picture.
It is a $4 picture. In today's prices, tomorrow will be a $4.50 picture.
They both have asked her.
absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, that was. The view from here is different.
It's a baseball night, get out of here.
You guys good? No side questions?
That was
All right.
it, thank you.
Sure thing. All right, well, thank you all.
Then I'll continue on with this for.
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
A quick question for Diane. Where is the parking that you were telling me about? Is it on the jump jack side of the road? Of Duxbury Road, or is it on the Big Hedge side of the road? Yeah, I thought you said there was parking on Duxbury Road. Or maybe I'm mistaken, and I biked by it. and
There
I-
used to be a long time ago.
Yeah.
There was,
Oh, okay, so there isn't any great parking.
there
Oh,
used to
okay,
be the
I
canoe
misunderstood.
access there,
Okay, I don't need
but
to.
now it's all blocked off. And
Oh. That answers my question. There's no great parking at Duxbury Road. Are we ready to move on to the next agenda item?
Okay.
Preparation for summer 2025 West Cochran Road.
This was your item, wasn't it?
So, okay,
So
the,
do I
I,
unrecuse
you know,
myself? Can I unrecuse myself or no, or just,
So,
okay,
sure.
if you want to, because I'm gonna talk about
You can't see it from in front.
the
of you.
beacon, so. You might decide you don't have a conflict of interest with beacon.
Beacon,
I
you know,
don't have a
Beacon's not-
conflict of interest.
Okay.
But I think exercising this is okay.
I would not challenge that.
So just, people may know this by driving by, there's a big pile of gravel for the old beacon access. And down the road where the newer beacon access is, the road is still across. Jim says it's there because the soil's still wet. I'll read his email. Hi, John, as you can probably tell by visual inspection, the new beacon lot is still too soft to open. We have permits in hand and are getting bids to gravel that lot for 20 parking spots. That should happen later this spring, depending on securing funding. Still not the most convenient spot for the existing boat launch, but the best we have. The old Beacon lot will be rehabbed with tree plantings this year. So at the moment, if you wanted to launch from that area, there's maybe room for 2 cars in front of the pile of gravel for the old Beacon site. And the other one has a rope across, which presumably will come down, but we don't know when. There'll be some construction, maybe that won't take very long, and then that'll take over. So I guess there's a possibility that there'll be cars on the side of the road in May, but maybe not.
And that letter was from Jim?
This is, yeah, from Jim Feinstein.
Okay.
And I just wanted to share that information, and maybe there's nothing needed for all involved. I mean,
It doesn't need us to get involved, but I'm curious how they're gonna bring material in there to put gravel on a parking lot that's in the floodplain.
it says we have permits in hand.
So I wonder how they,
Yes,
we keep, I anyways, keep looking at additional parking, and going, nope, can't do that, floodplain.
yeah,
And every good parking solution we have, we tend to shoot down. And now this clearly seems to be a thing that we would like to have done. We were scared to because of that conversation with Tyler.
I don't know the answer.
So, did I make a test
I
here?
understand you're.
So somehow there's a workaround because Tyler told us of the 5 tenants that allow you to create parking for recreation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder what that classification is. Yeah, I mean, there's different like flood overlays, flood flow, and just like, you know, because I know like when we did the look behind the sawmill, there's different names for the different flood levels that was seen around there. So I don't know.
As I stated in the beginning, that really isn't our business. I'm just curious. What hoops they're going through to do this, and if something we should be paying attention to, so we can use the
Yeah,
same hoops in the
yeah,
future.
maybe it's fine. And I'm mainly bringing it up because conceivably there'll be cars parking illegally on the side of Cochran Road. Perhaps the road will come down soon.
It is.
Oh, yes. That's all I had.
Well, good to know. I didn't know anything about that, so.
So Checker House.
Moving on to Checker House.
I think my input on Checker House is. I'm gonna report to Duncan first of May or so. Tell him we need 3 mowed or whatever. That's your rope there, if you want to go take that down, May 15, that's fine, but I think our job is not to maintain parking areas. So that repeats. Next project.
So
Okay.
it's mowing, right?
Duncan wanted to look at mowing, because he's not gonna do it, he's gonna contract somebody to do it. So I told him for a month or so, I think look and advise him, and maybe this year, the license or maybe raining tomorrow. I got nowhere with the signs. I'm not suggested DRB would keep to approve signs in there. And again, I'm not sure that's in our wheelhouse either.
Well, I wanted to follow up on that because we kind of, and I don't mean this in any critical way, but we kind of went over this last time. So we're doing a bit of a Groundhog Day thing, and I think regularly, and I think we need to decide, is it in our wheelhouse or not? Because we've kind of said it before, and then we repeat it. Again, this is not criticism. I'm just saying that, is this really for PAC to be talking about?
Which that's fine.
Well, just then you were talking about signs.
So in the past, we worked with people on our signs. That we needed when we changed ordinances in the town. At the time, we had talked about putting signs down there that said seasonal recreational parking, May 15th to November 15th. And at that time, there was no money for signs. So. I guess your question is, if I understand it, is it our job to promote the idea of putting signs there, or do we?
Well, maybe it is. I'm just saying that we've kind of talked about, we've touched on it a few times, but
I think that, we've sort of taken it upon ourselves to help communication. And science was part of that communication and, 911. Was, mapping was part of the communication. Doesn't say explicitly in that we're gonna take their signs, but, if the public is having confusion on what is going on, how can we help people understand? Seasonal closure sign is valuable. I would think.
So do we advise? That's an excellent question, Mark. So if we stick strictly to our job description, we would advise the select board that signs to be added, and it would go to regular Pete. There's a bunch of questions in a statement.
Hmm. Yeah. What do you do with that? You just go to Josh? Or it seems a lot to go on the select board just to ask for that.
Do we write a note to Duncan? We've done this, and we're to Duncan and Pete saying we think the shine should be there, and then Duncan's reply was, you probably have to go through DRB. And my thought was, you probably have to go through DRB.
Question.
Certainly we could make a temporary type sign like we've been using for recreational parking. And we could probably get somebody to get stiff, so whatever, get a couple of those that say seasonal parking. I think the primary goal was to get less pokey than we've been in the past. In respect.
A couple of years. For you guys, we did put a seasonal sign down there. It's really hard. It was really nice to put seasonal sign, and it was gone in a day.
Disappeared.
Someone stole it in a
I
day.
can't figure out.
And I think it needs a little bit of official looking sign to.
We don't know if it got knocked down and
No.
maliciously taken.
Yeah, we don't listen to that, but it's put it around.
So there's zoning rules that restrict signs that are different there than on Dugway Road. Am I?
It's a great question. I hadn't even thought about a DRB approval until Duncan said that I believe another committee bumped their head against something similar. And it may be that we're looking to put signs on state land as opposed to town land, that right away. Maybe that's what we're bumping our heads. If who do you think we should have a conversation with? Should I converse with Duncan or Keith or?
I guess Tyler ends up making the zoning rules, but or interpreting them. You'd think if it was on the right of way, it would be okay, but it's like it needed to be in the middle of the field somewhere. Do we want the signs? Do we want to?
I think it's, well, there's two reasons why they're helpful, if it was on both ends, it's easy to put a rope across. For when it's off season. Cause there's no trees or natural.
Is it okay with everybody if I poke around a little bit and see? Give me some info on this?
Yeah, maybe Duncan's mistaken.
Oh, and I will limit it to Pete, Duncan, and possibly the Patriots before that were already there. Okay, with that.
I'll make sure to poke around.
John, did you happen to have a look at any possibility? for the 911, for the Google Maps.
Yeah, and there's a submission process. You submit the change, and I think I can put those numbers and the dates. But they end up going to some sort of review on it, but so I tried it, but now I just need the data, so would I just put the dates that you just mentioned?
Yeah, temporary parking, I think that's what V-Trans wanted, right? 5:15 to 11:15, no, is that
I
correct?
think basically November 15th, I think that somewhat coincides with the trail schedule.
Mhm.
I think we decided to Chuck the poke around.
Chuck's poking around.
Perhaps talk to
Nothing
Pete,
new about that.
talk to Pete, talk to Duncan, and perhaps Tyler. Okay.
Does that finish us up for checkered house parking area?
I think so.
Okay, and if I guess the rope doesn't come down by 8:15, we can see if he needs help or something.
He's aware of that.
Okay. Then moving on to preparation for summer 2025 Dugway Road. Is anyone,
I will recuse myself from the conversation.
oh,
One thing that I always thought, for all of the areas, but Dugway and East Cochran in particular, is there any way we can gather any sort of statistics? So one thing that might be worth doing. I don't know exactly how to do it, but the land trust, they actually borrowed some, people counting here and actually did some surveys. Don't know if they're intending to do that now, but the one thought I had is if we wanted to put some parking questions in whatever account, whatever survey they want to do. Because it would be at least a way of year to year figuring out people's happiness or lack of happiness with what we've done. That's the only thing I can think about.
So it's an RLT question, John?
Yeah, I think that if they have intent, they've over the years done different kinds of data gathering, but it's not exclusively been about parking. Maybe we could even nudge them to, if they plan on doing.
Is this something you want to talk to them about?
Yeah, I'll talk to Jim. Is that the right thing to do?
yeah, and what there's been a shared, person on the ground, in some past years that
Insurance.
interned that went to more than one area perhaps, and
Maybe they could do both, because those are both RLT things. That might be interesting, because if you wanted to get the voice of people who are using it, who are not from town, that might be the place to.
That'd be interesting conversation with them, because with the Gillette Pond and the other.
So I'll take it to you to talk to Jim. Is Jim the right person?
he answered my question on Sunday. They're all of their names, of the board are listed on their website.
And they do have it broken out into, they do different things like acquisitions and. Finance.
I'll find my way to the right person, because I think that's.
Say, doing any data gathering, I'm not sure if any of their. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
I think it's just a data point that you can get. But that was the only thing I could think of for that way forward.
Data gathering, you down for that, John?
All right, and anyone who's recused, want to ask a question as a member of the public?
For the other,
Or for Dugway?
Those all sound like fun in ears.
Okay.
Chuck go right at Dugway Road.
Are we ready to move on to the next topic? Topics for our next meeting.
So I got down here, finished discussion on signs at Checker House. We're moving, there is a moving the sign on East Cochran Road. What else we got?
I think it wouldn't hurt for us to have another discussion and existential discussion, just about where we're headed over the next, the second half of this year. How often to meet, that sort of thing. I'm not by any means suggesting we disband, but I do think we need to talk more about, do we want to try to take on more? Do we want to just wait, see what comes our way?
No, I think that's a good addition.
I think it was H.W. Bush who was asked what his vision for the presidency was, and he said, whatever comes up. So maybe we could take the approach of whatever comes up.
Yeah, I mean, we can save the conversation, but it seems to some degree that the town has not asked our input on things that I think are important that we should be
Right.
asked about. I don't take that as a snub. But I do take it as
Value,
obsolete.
what's our value?
Yeah, that's what I meant by existential. I think we need to talk about what our value is, rather than,
It's a great conversation, and, perhaps it's just that, like, we've talked about this in the past, are we naturally ready to expand? No.
or we could ask, I don't know.
Won't change.
Yeah, we could ask John, can we be in a state of suspension for a while?
Again, next week, but dormancy seems to be in different stories.
Yeah, what do they call it? It's debating, what is the sort of hibernate until needed? But with that, do we also want to explicitly, I mean, in the understanding that we are gonna be ongoing in some sort of thing and that our terms are up, shouldn't we be at least reaching out to people who might want us to serve so that there's at least some overlap? I mean,
It's a great question. It's a chicken and the egg question, I think, is we need to have the existential talk. And then I think that'll lead us into the recruitment talk.
didn't we just have the existential talk?
I'm with Matt, I think we all need to go away, and I personally speak for myself, I need to go away and. Yeah. See how this feels.
It might be a tough sell, I guess it's not a
Yeah.
reason not to try.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hey, you wanna apply for this job? It's gonna be easy.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just lie in the mud until somebody wakes you up.
We talk about the same 5 things every week, every month.
Yeah,
Maybe we should take on another town's, we could take on Heinsberg's practice.
It would be no conflict of interest.
Trade.
So are we on to next meeting date?
I guess so.
Adjourn?
Yes.
Okay. Just look at the calendar. We cannot do the 12th of May, nor the 19th of May. But we can do the 26th.
isn't
That's
that,
Memorial.
Oh, it's
Memorial
Memorial Day. We can do them
what's the first Monday in June?
June 2nd.
It's the second.
What about June 2nd?
Well, I think, so we are on this every 2 weeks schedule, so we'd be scheduled for the 12th, is where we'd be scheduled, then we'd be scheduled for 26th, and we scheduled the 9th. Wait, I'm sorry, can I scratch what we just said?
Was that June?
Yes.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
Can you clean the board? We are here on the 12th. Of May,
But
I'm not there, I have the wrong. for
but
that.
there's no need to meet on May 12th, is there? 2 weeks from now?
2 weeks from, we're scheduled every 2 weeks.
I know, but
No,
that's,
I mean, on calendar wise.
I'm talking about the
And
meeting.
is, if there's an open room, Duncan would move it, if we asked him. Jim.
And the next time it's the 19th after that.
So, I think about hearing everybody correctly that we think the 12th might be too soon. And we should look for something further down the line, and then we come on here and like.
What do we think?
I may be out of town on the 19th, but I don't know that. And so I have a forum.
So,
Well, you're kind of needed for the quorum. You are our quorum guy. I'm gonna call in for the voting.
I don't know yet. I could possibly call it.
well, what about June 2nd? Is there any reason, that's actually just over a month away.
We're scheduled for the 26th. But what do people look like then?
That's not Memorial Day.
Well, it is, but I don't do anything special.
Oh,
in the morning.
I'm sorry, my bad.
No more of it.
Right, we're on the town calendar.
And really, it would be complicated doing that week for us, May 26th week. But up until then, we could go on another day. And for us, John, I think June 2nd, we're available. I think so, yeah.
Plenty of as far as I know.
Yeah, even had it on my calendar.
I am. So June 2nd? Everyone? Chuck, okay,
June 2nd.
So June 2nd has water and sewer selected, followed by the select board, which means we can probably have this one. So bring that over, I think.
Because it's not our every other, is it?
You know, maybe something will happen, but. Crisis, John, it'll be a crisis by then.
did you have a question, Diane?
If there's water and sewer and the select board, then we don't have a room on June 2nd.
No, they probably, oh, maybe I'm missing something. I see water and sewer and select board.
They're both at 6.
But water and sewer goes from 6 to 7, select board from 7 to 9. And they meet in the same room at the same table.
Oh, they do?
So both are on the same board.
Oh, I did not know that, Chuck. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, so they can have that room, we can have this room. Thank you. All right, I will reach out to Duncan on that. Correct? Everybody good on them?
So we're adjourning?
I don't think that we move that we adjourn.
My second.
Favor,
Hi. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.